Everyone thought Dapo was a good husband. He never shouted. He never fought back. He never complained. Then one night, a scream. A phone already recording. A video with no sound before it and no sound after. 30 seconds that looked exactly like guilt. And just like that, 11 years of quiet counted for nothing. But no one asked what a calm man had actually been carrying all that time. Because sometimes the marriage that breaks you begins in a house you left decades ago. Welcome to the Afro Tales with Kemi, where African stories are told slowly, honestly, and with meaning. This channel is more than a show. It is the foundation of the Afro Tales Academy, a movement built on one belief, that African wisdom should shape how we lead, how we train, and how we govern. If you have ever felt that in your bones, you are already part of this. So sit back, open your heart, and walk with me through today's tale, told as always, the African way. I am Kemi Iwalesi. Rain fell gently outside grandmother's compound that night, tapping soft rhythms on the low roof above the fire. The children sat together than usual, pulled in by the cold. One of them finally asked the question that has been sitting in her chest all evening. Grandma, why do some people stay in marriages that hurt them? And why do some people finally leave after so many years? Grandmother was quiet for a while, watching the rain fall beyond the firelight. Because my child, she said slowly, a person does not always leave when the pain becomes too much. They leave when they finally run out of reasons to stay silent about it. Tonight, I will tell you about a man named Dapo and a woman named Murayo. I will not tell you yet why they became who they became. Watch them first. Feel what their children felt, what their neighbors felt, what their church felt. And only at the end, when Dapo finally sits across from a stranger and is asked for the first time in his life to explain himself, will you understand where all of this truly began. Some stories, she said, only make sense backwards. The fire crackled, the rain kept falling, and the story began. Everyone in the community agreed on one thing about Dapo. He was a good man. He was a project manager at one of the city's respected construction firms, known for finishing what he started and never raising his voice, even under pressure that would break other men. He volunteered every second Saturday at his church, arriving early to arrange chairs, staying late to sweep the hall. Colleagues trusted him with difficult clients. Neighbors trusted him with spare keys. Even children in the compound trusted him the way children trust adults who never shout. He was by every account calm, dependable, kind almost to a fault. Murayo was a different kind of remarkable. She was ambitious in a way that turned heads, sharp in business meetings, quick with numbers, quicker with words. She ran a small events planning company that had grown in just a few years from her dining table to an actual office with 3 staff. People described her as a woman who got things done. Charming when she wanted to be, formidable when she needed to be. When they met at a mutual friend's church program, it felt to everyone watching like two forces finally finding their equal. "I've finally found a real gentleman," Murayo told her friends, glowing after their third date. "Someone who doesn't try to compete with me. Someone who just lets me be who I am." Dapo, for his part, told his closest friend something simpler. "She reminds me of women I respect," he said. "Strong, decisive, she'll never need me to carry her." Neither of them noticed in those early months how strange a compliment that was. To admire a partner for never needing to be carried, from a man who has spent his whole life quietly practicing how to carry everyone else. Their courtship moved quickly and beautifully. Murayo organized their outings with the same precision she brought to her clients' weddings, down to the smallest detail. Dapo showed up for every one of them without complaint, without correction, without ever once suggesting they do something differently. Friends who watched them together used the same word again and again. Perfect! At their wedding, amid the music and the dancing and the layers of Ashwebi swaying under colored lights, an elderly aunt of Dapo pulled him gently aside during the reception. She held his hand the way old women do when they're about to say something that matters. "Marriage is not tested on the wedding day," she told him, her voice barely audible over the celebration. "It is tested after the applause ends." Dapo laughed softly and thanked her, assuming she was simply offering the kind of poetic blessing older relatives often give at weddings. He kissed her cheek, rejoined the dance floor, and thought nothing more of it. He had no idea how literally true her words would become, or how long it would take him to understand why. The first year of marriage looked from the outside exactly as everyone had predicted. Successful, harmonious, enviable. But inside their home, something began shifting almost immediately. Quietly at first, the way a small crack begins long before a wall shows any sign of damage. It started with jokes. At a dinner with friends one evening, Murayo laughed loudly and gestured toward her husband. "You know that God won't even negotiate his own salary. Too soft. I keep telling him if you don't ask, life will not give it to you." The table laughed along. Dapo smiled thinly and said nothing, reaching instead for his glass of water. A few weeks later, at another gathering, it was his choice of shoes. "I bought him 3 pairs and he still wears the one from 5 years ago," she said, shaking her head with theatrical exasperation. "I sometimes wonder if I married a man or a museum piece." More laughter. Dapo laughed too. A bit too late, a little too quiet. Then it became his family. His mother calls every single day, Murayo told a cousin over the phone, loud enough for Dapo to hear from the next room. "I keep telling him, cut the cord though, we are a married man now." Whenever his face fell, even for a second, even just a small tightening around his eyes, Murayo had a ready line. Can't you take a joke again? I'm only playing with you." And every time, Dapo said the same word back to her. Yes. He didn't know in those early months that he was practicing a kind of silence he had learned long before he ever met her. He only knew that something in him recoiled from conflict the way a hand recoils from fire, instantly, instinctively, without asking why. By their second year, the jokes had sharpened into something closer to correction. Murayo began making decisions without consulting him, moving money between accounts, committing to expensive family obligations, agreeing to host events at their house without asking whether he had the energy for it that week. When he gently raised a concern, she waved it away. You worry too much. Just leave the thinking part to me. She began telling relatives, half joking and half not, that she was basically raising another child in this house, referring to him, not their children. It always got a laugh at family gatherings. Dapo always laughed along. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself this was simply how strong women expressed love, briskly, efficiently, without much softness attached. He told himself a great many things. In fact, during those years, mostly late at night, mostly to fall asleep. By the time their children were old enough to speak in full sentences, the pattern in the house had settled into something almost invisible because it has simply become normal. Morayo interrupted Dapo mid-sentence in conversations, finishing his thoughts for him, often incorrectly, without noticing. She corrected him in front of the children. No, that's not how you'll do it. Let mommy show you. Even for things he clearly knew how to do. She made major decisions about the children's schooling, their extracurricular activities, even their weekend routines, informing him afterward rather than asking beforehand. The children, watching their mother's tone modeled daily, began to copy it without understanding what they were copying. One evening at dinner, their youngest, no older than 7, climbed onto Morayo's lap instead of his and said cheerfully, without any real malice in her voice, "Mommy, I sit here, not with Daddy. You always know what to do." The table laughed, charmed by the innocence of it. Dapo laughed too, a bit too late. The table laughed. Morayo laughed loudest of all, ruffling the child's hair with obvious pride at her wit. "She's not wrong," she added, winking at her daughter. Dapo laughed too. It was by then an automatic reflex, the sound a man makes when he has trained himself over years to absorb a blow without flinching in public. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, he sat alone in the bathroom with the tap running, so that the sound of water would cover whatever sound he might make. He did not know, sitting there, that he was repeating an exact posture, the posture of a man crying quietly so that no one in his house would hear it, that had existed in his family for a generation before him. He only knew that something in his chest had been slowly hollowing out for years, and he had no language yet for naming it. At work, the toll became harder to hide. He began forgetting scheduled meetings. He stopped joining colleagues for the easy joking lunches he used to enjoy. His doctor during a routine checkup frowned at his blood pressure reading and asked gently whether anything was troubling him at home. No, Dapo said quickly. Everything is fine. Most evenings after work, he would pull into the driveway and simply sit there, engine off, hands on the wheel, for anywhere from 10 minutes to nearly an hour, gathering whatever strength was required to walk through his own front door. Neighbors who noticed his parked car simply assumed he was catching up on phone calls. At church, people described him formally as a quiet man, the kind of gentle compliment given to someone whose inner weather no one has bothered to ask about. No one, not his pastor, not his closest friends, not even his own mother, ever thought to ask Dapo a direct question about his marriage. He was after all a man, and men in the world that had raised all of them were not generally asked how they were holding up. It had happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind that gives no warning of what is about to become. They had been arguing, quietly at first, about a decision Murayo had made regarding their eldest son's school transfer without discussing it with Dapo beforehand. He had tried that evening to do something he never did, push back. His voice rose, not to a shout, but to something firmer than his usual practice calm. I am his father too, Murayo. You cannot keep deciding everything about our children's lives and simply informing me afterward as though I'm a formality. Startled by a version of her husband she had genuinely never encountered, a Dapo who did not simply absorb and retreat, Murayo's own voice rose sharply in response, fear and habit colliding at once. Their arguments grew loud enough to carry through the compound walls. And then in a moment neither of them would ever fully be able to explain afterward, Murayo screamed that Dapo had hit her. He had not, but the scream was loud and sudden and real enough that within minutes, neighbors were pounding on their gate. Someone was already recording on a phone before anyone had asked a single question. By the time police arrived, a blurry video, 30 seconds long, entirely without context, was already circulating in 3 different community WhatsApp groups. Dapo was taken in for questioning that same night. His employer, informed by morning, placed him on immediate suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. Standard procedure, they explained apologetically, for a serious allegation involving a senior staff member. His church, cautious about his public image, quietly distanced its leadership from him within the week. Several elders suddenly unavailable to take his calls. Friends he had known for 2 decades grew strangely hard to reach. For 9 days, Dapo sat inside a version of his life that had been completely rewritten by 30 seconds of video with no sound before it and no sound after. On the 10th day, full CCTV footage from a neighbor's compound, footage that captured the actual argument start to finish with no cuts, was submitted to the investigating officers along with statements from 2 witnesses who had been near enough to hear the entire exchange. The footage showed clearly no physical contact had occurred. The case was formally dropped. But an apology, when it finally arrived from Murayo, arrived very quietly in a nearly empty house, days after the community's noise around the accusation had already done its damage. It is, grandmother would later say, almost always this way. Accusations travel on wings, apologies arrive on foot long after everyone has already made up their mind. He did not live in anger. That surprised even Murayo. 2 weeks after the case dropped, Dapo packed 2 suitcases on a quiet Saturday morning while the children were at their grandmother's house for the weekend. He folded his clothes with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything else in his life. He did not raise his voice. He did not list grievances. He simply stood in the doorway of the bedroom they had shared for 11 years and said the fewest words he had ever needed to say to her. I don't know how to keep doing this. I don't think either of us does. I need to go somewhere quiet and figure out who I am outside of this house. Murayo, for the first time in their marriage, had no sharp reply ready. She simply nodded, tears sliding silently down her face, and watched him carry the second suitcase to his car. He moved into a small flat across town, modest, mostly bare, echoing in a way their full family home never had. For the first few weeks, the silence there felt unbearable in an entirely different way than the silence he had grown so practiced at carrying inside his marriage. This silence had no one to perform calm for. There was no audience left to protect from his real feelings. And so, for the first time in his adult life, Dapo had nowhere left to put them. A close friend, one of the very few who had stayed reachable through the ordeal, finally said something to him that no one in his life had ever said before. Dapo, you need to talk to someone. Not me. Not your pastor. A professional. Because whatever this is that you carry so quietly, it did not start with Morayo. I've known you for 15 years and I've watched you swallow things long before her name ever entered your life. Dapo resisted the suggestion for nearly 2 months. Then one particularly hollow evening in his empty flat, he finally picked up the phone and made the appointment. The counselor's office was small, quiet, painted a soft, unremarkable beige, the kind of room designed to hold difficult things without adding drama to them. For the first 2 sessions, Dapo spoke almost entirely about Morayo, her jokes, her corrections, the accusation, the video, the suspension. It was easier, he found, to describe what had been done to him than to look inward at why he had allowed so much of it for so long without ever once raising his voice in his own defense. It was in the 3rd session that the counselor, a calm woman with an unhurried manner not unlike his own, asked him a question that stopped him completely. Dapo, tell me about your father. He opened his mouth to give a short, polite answer, the kind he always gave when people asked about his family, and found to his own surprise that the short answer would not come. Instead, something much older rose up in its place. My father, he said slowly, was the gentlest man I ever knew. And I used to think that was simply his nature. It took me years to understand it wasn't gentleness. It was training. He told her then about the house he had grown up in. A house ruled in practice by his stern grandmother, whose word was treated as law long after her own children were fully grown. His father, her son, had learned early and thoroughly that questioning her, even gently, even respectfully, brought consequences that made peace feel like the only sensible currency worth spending. My father used to tell me, a man does not shout in his own house, Dapo. A man carries the peace even when it is heavy. He said it to me like it was wisdom, and for a long time I believed him completely because I watched him live it every single day of my childhood. He never raised his voice, not once, not when my grandmother humiliated him in front of visitors, not when she overruled decisions he had already made about his own children. He simply absorbed it, and everyone called him a peaceful man. The counselor let the silence sit for a moment before asking gently, and what did you learn to call it when you did the same thing? Dapo was quiet for a long time. Discipline, he finally said. I called it discipline. I never once in 11 years of marriage let myself call it what it actually was. Which was, he looked down at his hands. Fear, he said. I was afraid that if I spoke up, if I pushed back, if I said even once clearly, this hurts me, I would stop being the kind of man my father taught me to be. I thought silence was strength, I thought leaving or even complaining was a kind of shame I could never live down. So I just carried it the way he carried it until I couldn't anymore. For the first time since the whole ordeal had begun, since the scream, since the video, since the suspension, since the empty flat, Dapo felt something shift inside his chest that was not quite relief, but was perhaps its early cousin, understanding. Morayo joined a session 6 weeks later at Dapo's invitation, extended cautiously through a mutual friend rather than directly. She arrived early, sat stiffly, and spent the first 25 minutes defending her decisions in her marriage with the same fluent confidence she brought to every boardroom she had ever entered. The counselor listened patiently, then asked a question that mirrored almost exactly the one she had once asked Dapo. Morayo, tell me about your mother. Something in Morayo's practiced composure faltered just slightly for the first time in the session. My mother, she said, ran everything. Absolutely everything. The house, the trading, the school fees, the discipline, the decisions, all of it. She was the strongest woman I have ever known. And your father? Morayo was quiet for a long moment. He sat in a chair by the window, she finally said. For years. I don't even remember him making a single major decision in our house. My mother used to say, if I wait for your father to decide anything, we will all starve. And she was probably right. He just stopped trying at some point long before I was old enough to understand why. I grew up watching a man slowly disappear inside his own house. How did that shape what you believed love was supposed to look like? Morayo's eyes filled unexpectedly with tears she visibly fought to hold back. I think, she said slowly, I learned that if I ever let go of control, even for a moment, everything would collapse. I learned that softness in a man was something to be managed because I watched my mother manage my father's softness for 20 years, and it was the only thing standing between our family and total ruin. Nobody ever sat me down and taught me this. I just absorbed it, the way you absorb weather. And when Dapo showed you calm instead of collapse, when he showed you steadiness instead of your father's disappearing, what did you do with that? Morayo broke down fully then, for the first time since the marriage had unraveled. I didn't trust it, she whispered. Somewhere inside me, I think I was always braced for him to become my father, to slowly vanish into a chair the way my father did. So instead of learning to lean on his calm, I kept pushing at it, testing it, correcting it. I turned every soft thing about him to something I needed to manage, because managing was the only kind of love I had ever actually seen work. She wiped her face, her voice suddenly very small. I never once asked myself why a good man was slowly disappearing in front of me too. I was too busy making sure he never became my father that I never noticed I was becoming my mother. It was during this same period that their eldest daughter, sorting through a box of Dapo's belongings still left at the family house, found an old prayer journal tucked beneath a stack of neatly folded shirts. she had not meant to read it. But the first page, dated nearly a decade earlier, held her attention before she could stop herself. And she read on, page after page, for nearly an hour, sitting on the floor of her father's old closet. The entries were simple, unadorned, dated faithfully across many years. Prayers for patience with his wife. Prayers for wisdom in raising his children well, even when he felt invisible to them. Prayers repeated in different words, across dozens of entries, simply asking God to help him remain kind in a house that has slowly worn him thin. There was no anger in the pages, no accusation, only a quiet, exhausting, decade-long discipline of choosing gentleness, entry after entry, year after year, without ever once writing down the word he perhaps did not yet have. Enough. Their daughter brought the journal to her mother without a word, simply placing it on the kitchen table and walking away. Morayo read it alone that night, and for the first time she did not see a soft man who lacked ambition or a husband who was somehow failing to keep pace with her drive. She saw a man who had been quietly, faithfully enduring in the exact posture her own father had once worn, in a chair by a window. In a house she had spent her entire adult life swearing she would never repeat. She had built the very thing she feared most, simply by trying so hard in exactly the wrong way to avoid it. Months later, in a quiet room with no counselor present, no children listening from another room, no audience of friends or family to perform for, Dapo and Morayo sat across from each other and finally had the conversation neither of them had known for 11 years how to have. I learned that love meant holding everything together alone, Morayo told him. Her voice steady now, no longer defensive. I didn't know how to let you carry anything with me. I only knew how to carry it instead of you. The way my mother carried everything instead of my father. I turned you into him without ever meaning to. I am so sorry, Dapo. Dapo nodded slowly, turning his own words over carefully before he spoke them. And I learned that a real man swallows his pain to keep the peace, he said. So I never told you when something hurts. Not really, not honestly. I thought silence was strength the way my father wore it. It wasn't strength. It was just the same wound he carried, quietly handed down to me. And I carried it straight into our marriage without ever once stopping to ask whether it belonged here. For the first time in 11 years, neither of them was defending the marriage they had built or attacking the other for how it had cracked. They were at last simply looking honestly at the two separate houses each of them had carried inside themselves. Houses built by people neither of them had chosen, inherited long before either of them had ever met. I don't know yet, Dapo said quietly, whether this means we find our way back to each other or whether it means we build two separate, healthier lives apart. But I know I am no longer willing to carry a wound I never even named. Neither am I, Morayo answered. Whatever came next for them, reconciliation, or a peaceful, respectful, separate path forward, would take much longer than a single conversation to unfold. But something fundamental had already changed in that quiet room that neither of them would ever fully lose again. For the first time in either of their lives, they had stopped repeating what they had never once dared to name out loud. The rain outside grandmother's compound had finally softened to a light drizzle. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing steady beneath the dark. Grandmother looked slowly around the circle of quiet faces. You see now, my children, why I asked you to wait until the end to understand where Dapo and Morayo truly began. She let the fire crackle for a moment before continuing. If I had told you at the very start about the chair by the window and about the grandmother whose word was law, you would have simply felt sorry for them from the very first scene. And pity teaches nothing. But I wanted you to feel what their own children felt, what their neighbors felt, what the church felt. I wanted you to judge them the way the world so often judges a quiet man and a sharp-tongued woman, without asking a single question about the houses they came from. She paused. We do not enter marriage empty-handed. We carry our mother's fear. We carry our father's silence. We carry every house we ever grew up watching, whether we want to or not. And most of us do not even know we are carrying it until the weight of it finally breaks something in the open. Another pause, longer this time. A wound that is never named will always find a new house to live in. It does not disappear simply because a person grows up and moves far away from where the wound first began. It waits patiently for the next home you build, and it moves in with you, uninvited, unless someone finally sits you down, as a stranger finally sat Dapo down and asked you plainly, "Tell me about your father. Tell me about your mother." The children sat in complete stillness. Finally, one of them whispered, "Grandma, could Dapo and Morayo have avoided all this pain if they had understood their own houses sooner?" Grandmother smiled gently, the firelight catching the lines of her face. "Perhaps," she said, "if someone had taught them long before their wedding day that love is not something you inherit by accident. It is something you must choose on purpose every single day, especially in exactly the places where no one ever modeled it for you." She looked into the last of the flames. "I remember this also, my children. The world is very quick to ask a woman why she stayed. It is far slower to ask a man why he never spoke. Both questions deserve an honest answer. And both answers, very often, begin in the very same place. A house long before this one, where a child first learned what love was allowed to look like." The fire dimmed to embers. The rain fell soft and steady against the roof, and the story at last came quietly to its close. Every story is a mirror. Where did you see yourself in this one?
When the drum speaks, Africa remembers. When stories rise.